Hello and welcome to episode 5 of the Building Our World podcast. Today I had the pleasure of being joined by Nathan Williams, blockchain expert, serial entrepreneur and co-founder of Berlin-based Minespider, a company using blockchain to disrupt the mining industry. In this chat, we cover how him putting out content through blogs, event speaking and podcasts accelerated his growth and connected him with the right people. He's someone who loves to jump into unexplored business ideas in blue ocean categories and is really honest about why he is so eager to put himself out there, take risks and build businesses. This is something I'll let Nathan explain in his own words during the episode. He's clearly a smart person who has heaps of experience and lessons that he is more than willing to share, and I really hope you enjoy this one. Here we go. And we're live. Nathan Williams, I found a slot in your calendar. I took the opportunity and now we're here. Thanks for coming on. How are you?
Alex, thanks for having me on the show. I'm doing very well today.
So let's start off with yourself. I always get everyone to introduce themselves, what their company are doing at the moment, and where your business is up to as of now, September 2020.
Okay, so I'm the founder and CEO of Minespider. Minespider is a blockchain infrastructure for supply chain traceability. We got our start in the mineral industry, tracking where your metals come from and under what conditions they have been produced. As I'm sure everyone is somewhat aware on some level, you have no idea when you're buying a cell phone or an automobile or anything that contains raw materials at all, whether it has child labor been used, whether it's funded armed groups, whether there's been forced labor, any of these human rights abuses, whether there's been environmental damage as a result of the mining or any of the processes. And we as customers have the right to know. And it's not just us as customers. Businesses have the same problem. They want to know where their parts, where their materials are coming from, and it's hard. And so what we did is we said we want to bring in new technology in order to bring in a solution. And so that's what we're working on. And we do it by creating digital, unchangeable certificates that are stored on a blockchain that contain this information from every level of the supply chain.
Okay. So blockchain, so you're using blockchain to disrupt the mining industry, essentially. Now, I am not as intelligent as you, so I don't want to go into the technical stuff too much because I don't think people will get much value from hearing me.
I'm sure that you would. I'm sure you'd be fine. The thing is, like most people have heard of blockchain, but when they hear a blockchain, they think Bitcoins, right?
Yeah.
You think it's a way of buying drugs on the internet. It's a way of creating magical internet money. Essentially, it's not that complex in what it does. It's just complex in how you build it. Blockchain is essentially a way of creating unique digital items. That's it. Imagine if you had a digital item like a photograph or a sound file or a movie, and you could copy it 1,000,000 times and give it to all your friends. But imagine you knew which one was the original. If you had a way of knowing which one was the original, then it could store value. And this is exactly what Bitcoin is. The way it works is that you've got thousands of computers that all have the exact same record of who owns what coins. And so if I went and changed them, then everyone else would know that I faked it. And so it's a way of knowing what the truth is without having any one company at the center. And the way that's different from, say, your bank account is that in a bank account, you have to trust the bank to keep an accurate record. Certainly nothing wrong with that. It works in many situations. But blockchain is really interesting if you want to have one unique record of this database that you can be sure is unchanged, that isn't run by one company. And you do it by this complicated algorithm of thousands of computers having a copy and all voting on the real version of events. And so that's what lets you make these unique digital items. So, Bitcoin uses it to create unique coins that you can then trade back and forth, and they hold value and they're worth 10,000 euros a piece. And what we do is we create unique certificates that are representative of metals and can contain information, ISO certifications, government licenses, data on where they came from, where the location is, where they've been transported through, under what conditions they've been produced. And because you know what the original is, people can't go in and change it, modify it, say, oh, it wasn't really that much, change the location later to fake the record. What has been put in there is what is there. And so that gives an accurate picture to whoever purchases those materials later of the history and the provenance of these metals. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So the certificate is almost like the value that the Bitcoin. Sorry to use the comparison again, but in how you're using blockchain, it's the certificate that holds the value for everyone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay. Like the value in a blockchain is to be able to create these data structures or this record that can't be changed. And I mean, if you think about it, if you have a database on your computer, just an Excel file, then as long as you don't change it, it can't be changed. That's fair enough. But then everyone has to trust you. So, but if you copy it and give it to 10,000 people, and those 10,000 people all have the exact same copy and update it at the same time, then if you go and change an older record, then everyone else will know.
Yeah.
And so that's at a high level of how it works. Yeah. And it obviously gets very complicated because there's no single person on the chain that's trustworthy. It's really a combination of everyone else who's trustworthy. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So you're obviously a bit of an expert in blockchain, and we'll delve deeper into that later. So you have this knowledge of blockchain and this expertise. How on earth did you sort of wake up one day and think the mining industry needs blockchain to disrupt it? Where did you make that connection?
Well, I just make terrible life choices. What happened? I'm an entrepreneur. I've been an entrepreneur as long as I can remember, and like most entrepreneurs, life and most people, really, life tends to happen to you while you're busy making your plans. So, what happened with me is I had a background in software development. And I had tried a bunch of different projects that never really got off the ground, and I realized I didn't know how to run a business. So I went back to school when I was in my 30s to get my MBA. And when I graduated with that, my wife had visited Germany, and I was tired of living in Canada, where I'm from. A lot of our friends had left, and we were just ready for a change. So we said, "There's a big startup hub over there. In Berlin? Why don't we try our luck?" And so we came over in 2013, looking for adventure. And I just shook hands with everyone who would speak to me, and and said, "Look, I'm looking to get involved with the startup scene." And of course, it's always harder when you don't know exactly what you want to do or what you want to start. But back then, I was just looking for sort of the next phase, and I got involved with a bunch of software developers and people who were into data analytics. And coincidentally, at the time, I was approached by someone in my network who had trouble with his company. Now, this is always a good lesson to be as communicative as possible when you're an entrepreneur about what you're up to. So I was blogging and going online and telling all my network about my adventures, going to Europe, trying to start a company, meeting software developers, doing data analytics. And then someone in my network saw that, and they were CFO of an oil and gas supply company. And one of the owners had stolen $12 million from the other owners, and they needed to prove it. And so they just contacted me and said, "Hey, could you take all of this 10 years worth of data, put it in and figure out how to prove this?" And so we had this whole system built of using data analytics to identify when transactions were inaccurate. And it was useful for that company. I didn't actually get it to be a more generalized solution like I was sort of thinking at the time, but it worked. And out of that, with this network that I developed, I ended up finding through another one of my contacts, actually my father was working in chemical regulations. And there was a new chemical regulation at the time that was causing him and his network a lot of grief, called the REACH regulation. And so I ended up building a second company to track the regulatory status of chemicals. It was called Subvise, and it never really got off the ground. But this pushed me into this rather interesting world of regulatory software. We had BASF using us for a while. We had Michelin using us, but it didn't really take off. But
sorry to jump in. Why do you think it didn't quite take off on that particular one?
I can probably name you about 8 or 9 reasons. The biggest ones being timing. So,
very interesting.
Timing is always a big one, and it's the hardest to control.
Yep.
So when I started it was 2014. The big companies had gotten into this issue in 2013, and so they hired a bunch of interns to deal with this manually. It was expensive, but they had already sort of dealt with a chunk of the problem. But then there was a deadline in the regulation that the next big wave of it would hit smaller companies in 2018. And so I was too early for them and too late for the other guys. That wasn't the only issue. I mean, there was a lot of inexperience on my own part. I think if I, had life to do over with the person I am now, it probably would have gotten a lot more success. And I guess part of it is I love fields that are sort of blue ocean fields, right? Where there's not a lot of competition. You have to be a bit of an expert to understand it. But once you're there, you get a lot of attention because people have the problem and they don't know what to do with it. And when I got into blockchain for mining, it's exactly the same. And that's sort of how my career ended up going. But the disadvantage with something like that is that people don't always understand exactly what you're doing. And people can't pay you unless they understand what you're doing. And the hardest part of any new technology, of any technology you're trying to bring into be the next big startup, is figuring out that business model. How do people pay you? And that's something that I didn't really know how to do back then. And we tried a few things, but inexperience didn't help with that. And so it was a combination.
Yeah. That's one thing I never really realized before setting up my business. And I read a book called The Perfect Startup, not The Lean Startup. I still haven't read that yet, by a Ukrainian guy. I can't remember his name. And that's the first time I was aware of this whole timing thing where, if you're starting a company and there are already companies doing what you're doing, that's not actually a bad thing because it shows people are, there's demand for your product. And then if no one's doing what you do, it might be really worthwhile what you're doing, but it's going to take a while to educate even the early adopters in getting things off the ground.
Well, it's interesting you say that because when I started Minespider, it was 2017. The timing was better, but I was still early. And I was. And I mean, 2017 was huge for blockchain, right?
I remember.
If I would have done an ICO, maybe I would have if I was if I had the knowledge back then that I have today. But if I had done an ICO, it would have been much easier than it would be, in 2018, 19, or 20. But at the same time, the technology was still in its infancy enough so that big companies had no idea what to do with it. And so I actually spent about a year, the entirety of 2017, just studying and learning of how these distributed systems work, how you could apply them, what the policy issues were in the mining industry, how what had worked, what didn't work, what the unintended consequences were. And it wasn't until the end of 2017 that I wrote the first version of the white paper that And I knew that this was going to be big because number one, you had new regulations coming in, like I'd seen with Sabai's, like the REACH regulation. We had this conflict minerals regulation, which was coming into force January 2021. So I had a few years where this was going to become a more and more pressing problem for big companies. And then at the same time, I saw these big organizations and regulatory groups increasingly talking about blockchain as a potential solution. So I knew that if I could get in and just not die, that it would eventually be a rising tide that I could be part of. And that is how it played out. And it took longer than anyone in the team originally anticipated, but we're still here. So it's helped.
I remember in it was towards the end of 2017, wasn't it, where everyone was all of a sudden a crypto trader. And I remember I was working at my old company, recruitment, and one screen would be recruitment and the other screen, people would have their graphs of all their different cryptocurrencies, and everyone would think they're kind of, Wolf of Wall Street, and people were looking at the graphs because there were weeks and days. At that time, I'd just graduated, so I had no money to put in, which is probably a good thing in hindsight. But the Ethereum, it would literally it was so volatile. It would just go up and down, and there was this massive craze.
Oh, absolutely.
So that was my knowledge and experience of first exposure really to the blockchain, Bitcoin kind of stuff.
I've always been big on PR and doing as much as I can to promote my business with PR, with education, with teaching people as much as possible. And by coincidence, I was on CNBC in London the day Bitcoin hit 20K. And they were asking me about it. I was trying to talk about, blockchain traceability. I wasn't even touching on crypto, but everyone wanted to ask about it. And there I was saying, no, it's good. And then the next day, of course, or the next week, of course, the bottom fell out of the market. And
I remember that.
I don't know if it was the next week. I think it was in January that the knife started to fall. But it was just an interesting time all around. There was so much hype. But what's interesting is that Bitcoin has actually gone through this multiple times. And every time you've got it's settling at a different level, right? Like it goes up to 20,000, then settles at 7 or 8,000. Then, but before it had gone up to like 1,000 and settled at like a couple hundred. And before that, it had gone up to 100 and then settled back down at, at 20. And I think that each time you end up having a new influx of money into the system, but also a new influx of developers who build tools, who make it easier, who make it more accessible, who find new use cases. And in spite of all the hype, you still get real value that's built and generated on top of it.
Yeah. So it's not sort of a bubble in its entirety. Obviously, there'll be booms and busts, but if you look at the line, it gradually is going up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it makes sense because there is value in having a sort of a trustless infrastructure out there where you can say, well, I have a way of ensuring my data is secure or ensuring that my value can be transferred without needing to have 500 middlemen in the middle. So I mean, there is some definite benefit there.
Yeah. So coming back to Minespider, you had your first venture in Berlin, and it didn't go so well as you mentioned. So Minespider itself, you had this particular idea to use blockchain in mining. So you're sitting with this idea in your head. What was the process to turn these ideas into, a business, to start up, to launch, to get off the ground?
Good question. So picture it. It's 2017, January 2017. The current U.S. president is just being inaugurated. And within about 2 weeks of that, two things happen. Number one, my father, I tend to just absorb ideas from the people around me. And my father's been very influential in my life. And he contacts me and said, hey, I've just heard about this blockchain thing, this Ethereum. Watch this TED Talk. And so I watched a TED Talk about Ethereum. And I was like, what, is it just, buying drugs on the internet or something. No, it's quite interesting. So I watched it. I was like, okay, this is quite. It does have quite a large potential. And then shortly after that, there was a Washington Post article that was written about how they were concerned about the Trump administration rolling back conflict mineral regulations. And given that we had been in the industrial regulatory space before this, we started thinking, like, is this a possibility for the application of blockchain? Could we go and solve a problem that no one else has been able to solve? So what I did is I contacted everyone who was quoted in that article. I just sent them emails and said, hey, I want to work on this project, or I'm working on this project. And could you tell me what's been tried, what worked, what didn't work? And everyone was willing to talk to me. It was fascinating, and so I ended up getting an invitation to go on to the OECD forum for conflict minerals, which was nice. So you dress up in your suit jacket and pay no attention to the rattiness of your shoes, and show up and talk to anyone who would speak to me there about and just say, yeah, I come from a tech background. I want to work on this, and what's been tried. At the same time, I had to learn as much about the technology as possible. And two things sort of happened. The first thing was I just started posting everywhere about it. This is, again, not even just promotion, just talk about what you're learning. Other entrepreneurs talk about what you're researching, what you're learning, what you want to see happen, and people start to rally around it. One of my friends saw that I had been posting about blockchain, was learning about blockchain, was talking about things on LinkedIn about what I had discovered about blockchain, and said, hey, there's this developers conference coming up. They need a blockchain expert. Will you go and speak at it? And I said, yes, even though at the time I don't think I would have been considered a blockchain expert. I said, good enough, I will go. The conference was in German. My German is terrible. And so you got to use it to your advantage. So I went the night before. I read the Wikipedia article on blockchain, and I sat at the end of a panel of 5 people, and they would ask questions to everyone in the panel. And so I'd just listen for the keywords in German and then regurgitate what I had read in the Wikipedia article the night before. And
in German.
And I was like, just be like, yeah, does that make sense to you guys? And they're like, yeah, that makes sense. That's good stuff. And I was like, yeah, I could be an expert. I mean, and so, after that experience, this is what it was like back then. A friend of mine contacted me and said, hey, we should do a podcast. And I said, that would be great. And that was actually the first point where I really started learning, because it was the sort of a way to focus the research I wanted to do. I mean, no one will speak to you if you just phone them up and say, hey, I want to talk and learn about blockchain. But everyone will speak to you if you say, hey, I want to talk to you and have you on my podcast. And so I interviewed about 80 different blockchain founders, asked them about different ways they'd approach problems, different ways of designing distributed systems. And that really was the turning point for my understanding of the technology.
Yeah.
And then after that, and of course, making friends in the space and what have you, it's not important for you as a founder to have all the knowledge about everything. What's important is knowing where knowledge can come from. And so, like the design of the white paper, parts of it came from all sorts of different people that I spoke to. I bounced ideas off of who were much smarter than I am, who could give me feedback on how to design a system that would work well to secure people's data in the mineral supply chain. And people are usually keen to help out with their knowledge and share their experience. And so that really was helpful, because once that white paper was written, it was probably the first technical paper on how to apply blockchain in a decentralized way to this space. And so it got picked up and quoted by the Responsible Minerals Initiative, by different thought leaders in this area. And so that was how I sort of got into and known by these groups.
So did you sort of write the white paper and push it out like the other content that you've been doing?
So yeah, more or less. I mean, I didn't pay for any promotion of it or anything. I just put it up on my website and sent it around to my networks and just said, "Hey, I would love to hear what you have to say about this." I don't know how effective that would be today. I think that at the time everyone was really hungry for answers in this area, and that maybe today you would need to promote something like that a bit more. Like this is why I like these blue ocean categories, right? Where everyone has really niche problems and no one really understands all of the aspects to it. And I think the key to why I've gotten as far as I have so far is that I spent a lot of time understanding the problem and just asking and asking and asking, like, what are the aspects of the problem? Now, I've spoken to a bunch of entrepreneurs who would tell you the same thing. They always start with what problem you want to solve. Because if you start with the solution, in the solution space, you go and you say, okay, I'm going to build the next blockchain for supply chain. You don't have a problem you're solving, and so you don't know if anyone's going to pay you to solve it. Whereas if you really understand what the problem is that people have, that people would be willing to pay you to fix, then it's much easier to come up with the correct solution.
I think in that process of finding out what the problem is and what people's pain points are, putting stuff out there on your blog or LinkedIn or podcasting or whatever is such a good way of getting quick feedback and to build dialogue with people you've never met before. And I can see how that has worked really well for you. I mean, I was the same in terms of, obviously I do tech recruiting, so I'll post stuff on LinkedIn about whatever, interviewing or software engineering coding challenges and things like that. And you get software engineers just commenting on it, a little sentence on their opinion, and you remember that. You're getting instant feedback. You're getting known for what you do. You're just making a bit of noise. And I remember when I first started doing it, everyone was like, why are you doing that? Why are you posting about, boring kind of tech, like, what's needed in a coding challenge and things like that?
No, but it's not just boring to everyone. It's
exactly
not boring to the tech people.
And people need to, and same with this new tech recruiting business I started a few months ago. I want to make a noise on LinkedIn. I want to get to know my clients and prospective clients better, and that's why I'm doing this podcast. And also, there's a lot of value. There's a lot of software engineers I work with, and people just working in tech companies who want to know how these tech companies are born and started out. And I think we are in a value-driven content business world now. I think that's really, really important. I think direct selling is, I think that's old school in my opinion. So you seem to have adopted that probably behind the curve of quite a few years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's all right when you're dealing with older industries as well, right? Old school approaches work for old school industries.
That's an interesting point.
Yeah. I think that the approach of just making sure people know you is really important. Like, I'm in a B2B industry, right?
Yeah.
B2B. Okay, B2B is hard enough. B2 large enterprise is harder because large enterprises take 9 months, 12 months to make a decision. And so you've got a long sales cycle. Yeah. And so there are ways you can shorten that sales cycle, but it's not easy. And one of the ways is to be trustworthy, because people want to, if you're in a big brand and you want to secure your supply chain or adopt new software that is going to make you look good to your boss, it matters a little less what you pay for it and a little more that it delivers value and that the company is still going to be there next year.
Yeah.
And this is always the hard part of being a startup selling to big companies, is that there are a lot of hoops you have to jump through, and these sales cycles can kill your business. And so that's why when we started, we really focused on this educational aspect, just to make sure that my face or someone else on the team's face was around the table, that we were in the conversations with these international groups, and that people would see that there's always something going on, because over years, the people get a sense of knowing who you are and knowing your approach to things, and that helps them to make business decisions.
Yeah. They also just get comfortable with your name and what you do, and it's just popping up on various different things. It's almost like if you were to email someone like a cold email and keep following up, you're obviously in their inbox and your name's there, but posting and doing your podcast, I know you do Minespider TV as well, you're in their inbox or in their newsfeed in a different way, and you're giving them value as well at the same time, rather than just kind of following up. So
and people like being part of something exciting as well.
Yeah.
Right. Like if you see that there's something going on, you're like, oh, I want to be part of that. And you know, it helps keep a sense of momentum.
Absolutely. So we've gone off on a massive tangent, which is something that always seems to happen.
As is tradition for whenever I talk on a podcast.
No. Honestly, every episode I've done with we just go down rabbit holes, but that's what it's all about. So let's go back to 2017 again. You've now written the white paper. You started circulating it. There's a bit of noise coming around. I know you've got a founding team around you as well. So how did it develop now from people reading your white paper to that kind of next step?
Okay, so fun fact about founding team. I think I went through 3 founding teams. And this is the thing. Like when you're starting a new venture, even if it's a good venture, what happens is you tend to take the people that are closest to. And how do you meet them? Well, maybe you meet them at founders events. Maybe you knew them in school. Maybe you've started something before. Right now, I've got a very short list of people that I would start a business with again, should I start a new business. And it's just because I know who has worked well in the past. But there's no way of getting that list until you've done something, right? And so when I started, I got a few people around me that were friends of friends, or who commented on my LinkedIn posts, or who met me at an event, and because I would speak everywhere. And then for one reason or another, it didn't work out. Some of them wanted to go back to school and weren't ready to commit to starting a startup. Some of them didn't quite have enough money saved up that they could last until we could raise money. Some of them had very different working styles from me, and I brought them on early on, and then we found we weren't compatible. It happens. And
it's like a marriage, isn't it? The founding team, in a way.
It really is, and unfortunately, there's no simple way or to shortcut that process. The team I have around me now has been around me for quite a long time now. For I guess a couple of years, which is quite a long time in my world, and and it took a fair process of sort of sifting through the people that were interested, the people that came along, the different skill sets that were needed in order to generate that team. But yeah, it wasn't a smooth line. We'll put it that way.
Yeah, sure. So the founding team that you have now, and the one you kind of that's worked well, you've got your skill set and your expertise. What have they brought that's kind of complemented your skill set and everyone else's skill sets, that's meant that it's worked, it's been harmonious? I'm not saying it's perfect, but it's worked. But so what have they brought that maybe something you can't bring?
I have enough tech knowledge to get myself in trouble. Enough that I can design and discuss these complex distributed systems, but not enough that I could build it myself. So we definitely needed someone to handle the tech side, and we've got a really good tech team right now. I ended up co-founding about a year and a half after I started, when I met. I was working in a co-working space called Impact Hub, and I spoke to everyone there, of course. And one of them said, "You have to meet the co-founder of Impact Hub, and his name is Martin, and he's in Switzerland." And so when he came in, he was really excited about this project. He thought it had potential, and so we founded it together. And he brought in a couple of investors, and I brought in a couple of investors, and we were off to the races. And around the same time, like this all happened within a very short order, I had put up online an advertisement for a marketing officer, and the first person I interviewed seemed to be a match right away. And I knew it was going to work when, after she started, I said, "Okay, we need to design our new look and feel. You can change anything you want, but don't change the logo." Because I had already spent time on the logo. I really liked it. She came back with a completely new logo. And I was like, "Oh, I hate the fact that you did that. I hate the fact that you're right. It looks much better. All right, we're going with your design." And so I knew I needed someone around me that knew their stuff and was also confident enough to do what they knew was right, even if I said that it wasn't, because I needed that sort of in the same direction, not bad pushback in order to keep me in the right line, because I know I always don't know the right direction to go. And then and believe it or not, one of the first people that we got on the team and who was brought on board was a lawyer, and he actually met me, I think, early on, way before he joined. Because he was a listener to my podcast. And
wow, there you go. There you go.
And he came to my events, and he was working for a big company, and he had the same problems that I was trying to solve. And so he was like, "Yeah, I know how to deal with this." And so we've been together for quite some time now. And then after that, we've grown the team out through hiring and through other people. My father ended up joining and working with me after he retired. And
really,
it's been quite an adventure. And so now we're about 10 people.
And it's a remote team, isn't it? That you've assembled. How's that been? And why did you go remote instead of office space in sort of Berlin?
Well, we had office space right up until February when COVID hit, and we realized.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, but we were remote before that, just because it was part of our culture. We wanted the ability to work sort of anywhere in the world, and most of our clients are around the world, right? Like we've got two big. Yeah. In end of 2018, we started really getting some traction, and so we had a hackathon that we won that was hosted by Volkswagen, and we ended up doing a pilot project with them. And then we had Google approach us about doing a tin traceability project in South America. And so we're all over the world at this point, even though we're still a tight-knit team. And so working remotely wasn't that big a deal for us. We had sort of gotten used to it. We ended up giving up the office end of February because everyone wanted to work remotely, but it hasn't really slowed us down.
How did it affect your industry? The whole pandemic.
Everything got busier. So, on the one hand, a lot of companies had budget freezes, so they didn't want to. They didn't want to start new projects, even though they wanted to start new projects. And so we started talking about when we would start new projects and plan them out. But I saw exponential increase in the amount of inquiries about projects because most companies have had their supply chains disrupted in some way.
Yeah.
One of the big problems people have had is it's not just about responsibility and knowing that human rights violations aren't going on. It was about, can I get my medals? Are they all coming through one region that's going to be affected by a pandemic, and then if there's an outbreak in that region, I'm going to be stuck with no supply and no products to sell.
Yeah.
So there were a lot of inquiries around that. Like, the COVID has really highlighted just how little we know about where our products are coming from and under what conditions they're being produced. And so, people are looking for a way of solving that now, I think. Yeah. But the big thing that we've learned in the past year is we've done these big projects I've told you about, but they all required multiple companies holding hands, sharing data, signing on, and that's a very slow process. So what we're working on now is a product that's still supply chain, still blockchain, but can be sold to one company, allowing the company to create a certificate about about their processes, their policies, and just attach it to their invoices or their material that show their customers what's going on. And it can be linked. It can be linked still in the supply chain, but it doesn't require an end-to-end in order to be useful. And so that's sort of where we've the hard lesson that we had to learn, because it just slowed everything down to do an entire supply chain end-to-end.
Yeah. It's amazing how the pandemic has really obviously destroyed some industries, but really almost brought the future to us in a quicker way. I think I phrased that pretty badly, but
no, but it makes sense.
The future has come sooner. The future has come. It's sped up basically the evolution of business. So we've talked a lot about your business and what you've done and the things you've done to basically get to where you are today. And there's so many avenues that we could go down and explore. But one thing I want to know is, I know kind of what you've done, and we can see why it's succeeded, especially with Minespider. But why? And this is about you, really. Why have you done it? You say you've always been an entrepreneur. You've always wanted to go out into those blue ocean fields. You've taken risks. You've put yourself out there, blog posts, podcasts. You say that quite sort of flippantly, but it's not easy doing that, putting yourself out there and putting your knowledge out there, because I know from experience, people will give you kind of positive but also negative feedback. So where do you think this risk-taking, this entrepreneurial spirit has come from? Where did this all start from you personally?
When I was very young, maybe about 6 years old, I had a sister who passed away. And it profoundly marked my life, even though I was young. And I think what it did is it gave me sort of a sense of urgency that I want to accomplish something, that there's not a lot of time. And I didn't really know how to direct that for many, many years. Like, I really sort of reinvented myself after getting my MBA, and that's where it really started to feel like I had direction to it. But I think if I'm looking back at sort of the instigating moment of why it's been hard for me to focus on a career and specialize in just working for someone else, is that I wanted to see myself as part of something bigger and directing something myself. And it came out of that sort of sense of urgency of wanting to work on a big problem. And I think beyond that, I was always sort of taught to keep my options open. And I've always been interested in many, many things. And that's a strength and a weakness. And our strengths and our weaknesses are two sides of the exact same coin. And being that type of generalist makes it hard to be employable.
Yeah.
It comes down to, if you have a problem with your knee, do you want to go to a doctor or a knee doctor?
Yeah.
Probably the knee doctor, because they work on the knee, and you probably don't want to go to some guy that learns fast and is good at a lot of things.
Yeah.
So that has been sort of my Achilles heel for trying to get started as a software developer, or as an expert in one particular specialist field. But it's been very useful for being an entrepreneur, where you need to know a little bit about a lot of things, bring them together, and communicate it in a solid way. It just took me about 35, 40 years to figure that out. But you know what they say, it only takes 10 years to make an overnight success. So
Yeah. Do you see yourself, if someone asks kind of what you do you identify as a business guy or a tech guy?
Definitely more of a business guy. Yeah, I mean, I can program, but I'm not the guy you want to program. I've built like small systems, the previous company I had. I built in a little AI to track chemical names in the news to give updates to people, and I can do that. But software engineering has come a long way in the past 20 years since I studied it. And there are organizational techniques and things that are not my strength. My strength is really in the communication side, and in sales, in teaching and explanation, in content creation, in sharing a vision, in having a vision, and bringing all of these experts together and trying to synthesize something out of that. And I think that's where I operate most effectively. And in fact, I think a lot of entrepreneurs get hung up about their idea and being that point of origination. I think that where an entrepreneur is best is when they see the ideas of all of the smart people around them, and then can find a way to make them fit together, bringing multiple worlds together. That's where a lot of value is created. That's what I'm doing here. I've got the world of blockchain and the world of policy. Like conflict mineral policy, and they know each other exist, but they're complex enough to devote your career to either one of them. And so this is where my weakness of sort of knowing a little bit about a lot of things becomes a strength, because I can speak to both, bring them together, and make something interesting out of it.
Yeah. They say entrepreneurs, they can never find a job once they've started, because they're just too much of a generalist. It's always so interesting to hear the kind of the human story behind, why you pursued this certain life choice, and everyone's has a different time when they come to maybe starting a business or building on an idea. For me, when I was younger, I couldn't give a toss about businesses. All I cared about was, going to the gym and playing rugby, and the weekend and things like that. Now, mid-20s, it really kind of hit me, this entrepreneurial urge to start my own business and put myself out there. This podcast, things like that, and I think people need to realize that things come to you at different ages, different times, and life's not a competition with other people as well. And maybe I'm speaking to people who are more my age and in their 20s, because they're part of the social media world. I don't know how big you are on your Instagram, or even if you've got on TikTok yet, but everyone compares themselves to everyone. Everyone looks at the nice stuff, their successful businesses and the highlight reel, and people want to compete with that. And it's shaped a lot of people's mentality, especially my age and younger. So I think it's important for people to know that everyone's got their own timeline.
The other thing that's important, especially in the entrepreneurship world, is that it's very tempting to feel this sense of competition. If someone else is succeeding, that means I'm falling behind, and especially when you see everyone on LinkedIn or Twitter, or I guess for you youngins, the Instagrams and the TikToks. But realistically, especially if you're in a small field, like I am, it's important to celebrate wins. And, I've got a couple of competitors out there, and I like to consider that we're on very good terms. I see them announcing something. I like to say, hey, congratulations, because you know what? It's hard to do what they do, and every success in this field grows the field a bit. And being in a space where you can celebrate your competitors' wins, I think is important. Number one, because someone's got to buy you someday if you're going to exit. And so being on good terms with your competitors is probably healthy. And the other thing is that it's just important for your own state of well-being. Like if you always feel like you're behind and you've got to claw every bit of success out of someone else's failure, then it's probably not going to be a happy road, because everyone is trying to build themselves up. And I just think it's a nicer world to live in when we can celebrate each other's successes and not see your success as my failure.
Yeah, just because you win doesn't mean that I lose. That's so important. One thing I've done with my new business, obviously, it's pretty tough, especially in this kind of climate. So I've always been a big believer on like writing stuff down and journaling in a way. So at the end of the week, I'll write down every positive thing that's happened. And 9 times out of 10, there's a lot more good stuff that's happened than you probably think, or your mood is telling you.
Oh, I bet. Yeah, I mean, entrepreneurship is a painful roller coaster, and keeping track of those successes, no matter how small, helps keep it in perspective.
Yeah, keeps that dopamine topping up. So we'll wrap up very soon. I appreciate I've hijacked quite a lot of your calendar at the moment.
Oh, it was a pleasure. Thank you for having me on the show.
What would be great to do if there'll be people out there listening, software engineers, or people working in tech companies who love the ideas, that love the company they work in, but they've got an idea. They thought about maybe starting their own thing, or with their friends starting a business, maybe someone even at university or whatever. If you could go back right to the start of your entrepreneurial journey, what sort of 1 or 2 bits of advice would you give those people who want to build on an idea?
To the start of my entrepreneurial journey, I would say start by selling. I think what I have done sort of more correctly, wouldn't say right, but more correctly with Minespider that I didn't do right with my previous businesses, is I wanted to build something I was proud of first. Whereas really what I needed to do was understand the problems that my customers had. I needed to go out and maybe it's not even about selling. It's about going and talking to people and saying, what problems do you have? How can I solve them? And would you be willing to pay this in order for me to solve this for you? And just spending more time in that problem space and understanding the pains and the needs of the people that I'm talking with before spending time and money building would be an enormous asset. And the second thing is, in the moment, it never feels like there's enough time to do what's important. It's like the tyranny of the urgent. There's always something urgent that needs to be done, but the important things get put off, like doing the documentation, like spending time to build up to update your website, or the things that are long term, because someone always has an immediate issue with their account, with their software, with something, and 9 times out of 10, all of the effort that I put into the urgent gets thrown away, and the stuff that was important that I invested time in, that took more time but I didn't feel I had time to do, was what lasted and generated value in the long term.
Have you come up with a process to stop yourself being distracted by the urgent stuff?
No. I mean, it's going to be an ongoing problem for most of us. I think just having days or even team meetings, having a team helps. Honestly, having people that can sort of look you in the eye and give a bit of pushback and say, "Hey, do we really need to be doing this?" who you trust enough to ask you, hey, are you sure that this is a good thing to spend time on, is exceptionally helpful for just taking a step back and going, really, should I be spending so much time on this? But some of it is just also experience, right? Like I couldn't have known at the beginning of my entrepreneurial journey which 5 or 10 customers or potential investors would have wasted 80% of my time. Now, later, I know which ones I don't trust, but also some traits to look for where they, if they start going down certain holes, that it's like, okay, this is going to take awful lot of time and maybe never pay me. So that's just experience, and there's not much you can do to earn it. There's no quick way to learn experience.
Yeah. You got to learn by doing. You got to get out. All the big lessons from my life have all been through doing, not sort of reading a book.
Yeah, it's good to learn as much as you can from the experience of others, so you don't have to go through the big things. But at some point, it really comes down to getting a gut sense for what the right thing is to do because you've done it before.
Yeah. No, I really. In every episode, it's come up that you need to get feedback on your problem, and you need to speak to as many people in your field as possible. So it's definitely a recurring theme. So as I said, we'll finish up real soon. If someone wanted to get hold of you or get in contact with you to pick your brains, you've done a lot, and we've only really scratched the surface. Maybe we should do this again in the future to go even deeper. What's the best way to get in touch with yourself?
Probably through LinkedIn. Most people I speak to, I get in touch with on LinkedIn, and I usually chat with them. I get a lot of spam on LinkedIn as well, but
every founder I speak to says that it's actually, I don't know if you found it, but they said recently in this year, the spam has really got out of hand on LinkedIn.
It has, but I mean, you can tell immediately if something is spam or if it is not. If it's 5 paragraphs long and explaining how you offer services, then it's spam. And if it's 1 paragraph and says, hey, I have a quick question. Oh, I heard this. I would like to talk to you, or would you mind answering a quick question? Then it's not spam.
Yeah, absolutely. And if there are any mining companies listening who want to use your services, I suppose it'd be big corporates.
You'd be surprised how many people come through non-mining specific channels.
Really?
And usually they can reach out to me at hello@minespider.com. Just hello@minespider.com, and we usually get back pretty soon, like within a day or two.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time. Got heaps of value from that, and we'll definitely do this again. We'll dig even deeper, but there'll be a lot of people out there who are really interested in your journey, and I'd love to see how you've done everything as well.
Well, thanks so much for having me on the show, Alex. It's been a real pleasure, and good luck with your recruiting business, and I hope it really takes off.
Cheers, buddy. Thanks. Thank you so much for listening to the Building Our World podcast. To show your support and to stay up to date, then be sure to hit that subscribe button. Until then, I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.